Matthew, welcome to Vienna.
Thank you.
Tell us a bit about trafficking. What's going on with the latest developments? What are the top line numbers? What do you want to say about trafficking?
So, human trafficking, it's a crime, and it's really serious human rights abuse. It affects, every country, every community, every industry. And what it is actually, at the end of the day, it's just people in exploitative situations and who are just unable to escape from these exploitative situations. So migrants are actually vulnerable to trafficking, and IOM. We've been working for now in 20 years on helping states and governments to really respond to this crime. So we do quite a lot. Ourselves, together with our UN colleagues, together with private sector and governments, to prevent trafficking from happening. Working with at-risk groups, at-risk communities. And we do a lot as well to protect victims, so helping frontline officers identify victims and then provide them with the services they need to be able to recover from the exploitation. So working a lot with NGOs, so we provide direct assistance to victims as IOM, 8,000 victims per year more or less, but we also build capacity of others, state protection actors and NGOs to provide these different services that victims may need, whether it's actually temporary shelter, medical care, return, integration, legal assistance to be able to access their rights. So there's quite wide areas of needs that victims may have as a result of the exploitation, and we're working with others to meet their needs as well as we can.
Great. And when people think of trafficking, they normally think automatically of sex trafficking, of prostitution, and they normally think of women as being the victims. Is that correct, or is there other things that we're missing out with that sort of generalised view?
So it's not correct. It's true that when the international community actually woke up to the issue of trafficking, it was, again, as I said, 20 years ago. And at the time, what the issue was indeed sexual exploitation of women, especially in Europe. But the definition of trafficking, the international definition of trafficking, goes much beyond sexual exploitation, and it looks at indeed defining trafficking as well as trafficking for forced labor and other issues. The problem is that because there's been this initial focus on sexual exploitation and female, we've been identifying and been equipped to identify or looking into mostly women exploited for sexual exploitation, and as a result, I think we've tended to overlook males and victims of trafficking trafficked for other purposes, such as labor trafficking. But as I said, so if you look at numbers of identified victims, it's still a majority of females, women and girls, and still a majority of trafficking for sexual exploitation. But again, I think there's a whole lot of other victims that are actually unseen and invisible, and that's tend to be the case in certain contexts for males and victims of trafficking for forced labor.
You mentioned 8,000 victims a year that we help, but how many are there? Do we have any idea how many people are being exploited per year?
It's very difficult because, again, it's a crime, undercover, so there are no global figures on trafficking. We know how many governments and how many are detected every year, but again, that only gives you a fraction of the total number because many just go undetected. So we have actually figures of that can help. We have figures on forced labor. So forced labor is not trafficking. Not all cases of forced labor are cases of trafficking, but we know that in the world there are 40 million victims of forced labor and forced marriage. So again, that gives you an indication that when we talk about trafficking, we're talking about tens of millions as well. For sure. So IOM has been working a lot with governments, with UN partners, ILO, UNODC, to try to really shed light and come up with numbers. It's difficult, but we're actually getting there. Why is it important to actually get to numbers? First to raise awareness, I guess, of the public that it's a big issue that affects everybody, and it really has a role to play in actually preventing trafficking and helping victims. But also it helps measure progress against eradicating trafficking. If you have a baseline, you know that this year, in that country you had this number of victims, then you're able, down the line, 2-3 years later, 10 years, to evaluate if your policies or programs actually have had an impact. So it's important for that as well.
Very good. And finally, what are you doing in Vienna this week? What brings you here?
So I was here actually for, I come here on a regular basis, but also because, especially because UNODC is based here. And we actually have regular coordination meeting between all the UN agencies working on trafficking to coordinate our policies and programs, share information. So that's done through a body that's called the ICAT, the Interagency Coordinating Group Against Trafficking. So we meet on a regular basis and try to come up with joint UN positions on certain issues, advocacy message, and coordinate our work. So that was the meeting I attended yesterday.
Super. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
I'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Safe travels. Bye-bye.